Hello. In this video, we will talk about personality traits and how personality traits relate to leadership. You see, everyone likes to be a leader, or at least most people do. No one likes to be just a follower, right? But do you have it in you to be a leader? Do you have the kind of personality traits that leaders have? Those are some of the questions that people who aspire to be leaders may have in their mind, either at a conscious level or at a subconscious level. But those are some of the questions that all aspiring leaders have. So this is a very important question. And the answers to these questions are even more exciting, even more enlightening. But before we make the connection between personality traits and leadership, we need to have clarity about what do we exactly mean by personality traits. We now already have clarity about what leadership means. We have, couple of videos devoted to that particular topic. But do we have clarity about what personality traits are? So that's the first question we will ask and we will answer. I think it's going to be easier to understand personality traits if we contrast it with something different and yet similar in certain ways. I'm talking about moods here. Uh, In this graph, what do we see? We see that our moods vary by the time of the day. This is from a study conducted by Watson, published in 2000. And we have data here about the moods of different people between 9 a.m. and midnight, right? And what do we see here? We see that positive affect or positive mood is lowest in the morning at 9 a.m. As the day progresses, the positive mood seems to get better, and that's an initially steep increase until noon, and then it flattens a little bit. But the positive mood on an average seems to be highest at 3 p.m. And after that peak, it slightly declines, and after 9 p.m. there's a big dip in the positive mood. In contrast, what do we see for the negative mood? In contrast, for the negative mood, we see that, well, in the morning we seem to be the most negative, and then there's a decline by noon, and then it pretty much stays the same for the rest of the day. Now, these are just averages for the population studied, right? There will be individual differences. The pattern that we see here may not necessarily apply to you. It doesn't apply to me for sure. My mood, for example, is very high in the morning. A positive mood is very high. So I would be somewhere here. My positive affect is very high. In fact, as the day progresses, my positive affect, I think, starts declining. But I start out with a high because of certain habits that I have, like meditation and going for running, and those activities give me a real high. I'm a morning person, and so there are individual differences, right? But this is the overall pattern for the population that was studied. Now let's take a look at the next graph. In this next graph, again, we see that moods vary by the time, by the day of the week, right? It's from the same study. And we see that positive affect or positive mood is lowest on Sundays because we are dreading the Mondays, right? And then as the week progresses, our positive affect kind of gets better. But as we come closer to the weekend, we start feeling really happy, and we are the most happy on Saturday. The negative mood almost takes a opposite pattern. We are least or most negative on Sunday because again we are dreading the Monday, the work week. But as the week progresses, our negative affect kind of declines, and we are least unhappy on Saturday, pretty much similar to Friday. So What do these graphs tell us? It tells us that our moods change. They are not fixed. In contrast to moods, our emotions change even faster, right? What do I mean by that? Right now, I'm recording this lecture and I'm in a good mood. But imagine I receive a phone call from my family and somebody is very sick. That could suddenly change my emotions. I may, if the person is very sick, I may start worrying, and so my emotions make a sudden change. Moods, in contrast, tend to be a little bit more stable. So while our emotions can fluctuate depending on what stimulus we encounter, our moods tend to be more stable, relatively more stable, right? Our moods may last for a few hours. If we are in a sad mood, that may last for a few hours or maybe even few days. Occasionally, it may last for over a week or two, right? In contrast, our emotions, they change, much frequently. I receive a happy news and I'm suddenly very happy. I suddenly, somebody says something nasty towards me and I get really agitated, really angry. So emotions can change much faster, but moods tend to be more stable. So this is, I think, a good ground to contrast with personality traits. When we are talking about personality traits, we are talking about similar things. Like, one of the components of personality traits is it's our tendency to feel certain kind of emotions. But when we are talking about emotions there, or the kind of affect that we may be prone to feeling, in contrast to emotions and moods, personality traits tend to be extremely stable. Our personality traits don't change by the time of the day, by the day of the week, or for that matter, by the month of the year. Our personality traits tend to be very stable. Okay, not that they cannot change at all. They do change, and that is something that I will touch upon later. But relative to moods, relative to emotions, they tend to be extremely stable. So your friend from, say, your high school, you meet him or her after 20 years, you may get the feeling that this person hasn't changed at all. He's looks like not just physically. Physically, the person may have changed, but psychologically, he seems to be the same person. So what is it that has stayed same? That's what we are referring to here. We are referring to traits, those personality traits that tend to be so stable that it gives people a distinctive identity, right? So that is how we define personality traits, actually. In the next slide, I will go to the definition of personality traits. So people tend to follow some consistent pattern in the way they tend to think, in the way they tend to feel, in the way they tend to behave. That consistency gives people their distinctive identity. In other words, you can differentiate between people based on these patterns that you observe in them. So we see meaningful differences between one person and another based on these distinctive patterns. Now, there are many ways that we can go about finding these individual differences. Physical attributes, for example, somebody may be extremely tall, somebody may be extremely short, and somebody may be of average height, somebody may be very muscular, another person may be skinny. But these attributes give people them their identities, right? Their hair color, the color of their eyes, all these factors do contribute to people's identities. And they tend to be very stable, right? Our heights, don't change dramatically after we have gained adulthood, right? Similar kind of concept here. When we are talking about personality traits, the way we define it is that it's distinctive and relatively enduring ways of thinking, feeling, and acting. So we are not talking about physical attributes here, like height, skin color, and so on and so forth. We are talking about attributes in terms of the way we tend to think, the way we tend to feel, the way we tend to act. But if these patterns tend to be enduring, in other words, if they tend to be so stable that they give people some kind of uniqueness, some kind of distinctive identity, that's what then we call as personality traits. Now, let me explain the same definition visually. Why? Because we are visual creatures and it becomes easier to understand difficult constructs if we represent them visually. So here we have a graph, a hypothetical graph. So on the x-axis, we have time, say in months, but it could be years, doesn't matter. So each of these units, let's say, equates 1 month, okay, or yeah, 1 month. So we have 10 or 12 months here, depending on how many units we have. And on the y-axis, we have our emotional state. So 0 would mean we are neither feeling positive nor feeling negative. The higher up we go, we are feeling more positive. We are very happy. If we are going downwards, we are feeling negative. We are unhappy. Let's say that's the overall stage. Now, our emotions, our moods can certainly vary, as we have seen in the previous graphs from Watson's paper. So on a day-to-day basis, our emotions, our moods are varying, right? This is how, and it may look like an ECG, whatever, but we see that it's varying. It's not exactly the same. You get the idea, right? But what do we see here? So this could be the pattern of one person. Let's say, let me draw that of another person. Let me pick another color. Let's say purple. Another person may have a pattern something like this. Again, we see that the person's emotional state is changing. It's fluctuating. It's not always staying the same. Let me draw one more person. Okay, that's enough. So as the months progress, we do see that the emotional state of different people are changing. But we also see something different. We see that this person's emotional state, the person in red, it does vary, but it stays within a certain range, right? The person is, yes, sometimes the person is less happy than other times, but it mostly fluctuates within a range. So generally this person is way more happy than this person in purple, let's say, right? This person is usually unhappy, right? So the emotional state of this person changes as well, but overall we see a pattern. We see that this person is generally unhappy. This person in green, we see that this person's emotions changes as well, but sometimes this person is happy, sometimes unhappy, but even there we see that this person has a range. It fluctuates within a certain range. That's range is pretty much staying stable over the months and maybe even years, and that's what we are referring to as personality traits. So now you see this red person is very different from the green person, is very different from the purple person, right? So based on the tendency to feel positive or negative emotions, we see three different people here, each with a distinctive identity. The red person is usually very happy-go-lucky person. The green person is mostly neutral, sometimes a little happy, sometimes a little less happy or sad, but mostly stays neutral, whereas the person in purple mostly in a negative mood, sometimes a little less negative than others. You get the idea, right? And this, even though we are seeing changes on a day-to-day basis, because we see a consistency over a long period of time, that stability gives people that distinctive identity, and that's what we call our traits or personality traits. Here are the 5 major leadership traits. or the traits that are most strongly associated with you being perceived as a leader. The emphasis here is on being perceived as a leader, meaning other people will view you as a leader if you are intelligent, if you are confident, if you are determined and have high integrity and are very social. If you have these qualities, then you are more likely to be perceived by others as a leader or as a person with leader-like qualities. And consequently, people will be willing to follow you, which is nothing but leadership emergence. So there are certain personality traits that are associated with you emerging as a leader. Now, strictly speaking, some of these factors are not traits. Intelligence, for example, is not a personality trait. It is more an ability, an intellectual ability, right? Let's, in fact, start our discussion with intelligence. Of course, we have seen many people, many leaders who are extremely intelligent. So we currently have Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs was again very intelligent. We have the perception of they being very intelligent individuals, and they reached these top leadership positions. So when we talk about intelligence, we talk about IQ scores, right? 100 is considered average. If you have an IQ score of 100, that is considered average. If you have a score of 115, you are more than 50 plus 34. So 84.1% of the population. Your IQ is more than 84.1% of the population. If you have an IQ of 130, your IQ is more than what? 97.8% of the population. So that is super high. You are very high on your intelligence then. If your IQ is 85, well, you are only say about 15% or 16%. Your IQ is more than 16% of the population, and so on and so forth. So that's what this bell curve shows. Now, why am I showing you this? Because I'm going to share you some of the results of the research studies that have been done on the intelligence of the presidents of United States. This graph that you see here shows the different IQs of, or estimated IQs of different American presidents. Not their exact IQs, because of course, not everyone here must have been tested on IQ tests. But researchers using different complex methodologies, which we won't go into here, have been able to estimate the IQs of different presidents. And of course, the person with highest IQ has a very high score of 168.75, J.Q. Adams. But even the person with lowest IQ amongst the presidents, Grant, had an IQ of 120. By the way, this is actually not as accurate data, because these are uncorrected scores. If you look at the original study from which these people drew this graph, J.Q. Adams's corrected IQ scores was actually 175, and after the statistically correct for certain factors, it was 175, and the least intelligent Grant's IQ was 130. That is more than what? 84% of the population. So intelligence then becomes a great predictor of whether you will be perceived as a leader, whether or not you will become a leader. And you can realize why intelligence matters, because leaders have to make decisions. They have to take decisions which require complex problem-solving abilities. And the more intelligent you are, the better you will be at solving problems and making those complex decisions, right? So intelligence does matter a lot. And people also are much more willing to follow a person who is more intelligent. Now, this does not mean that high intelligence is always going to be helpful in leadership positions. In fact, there is evidence that in certain situations, high IQ may not come of much use to you in enhancing your performance. This is explained well in the cognitive resource theory. So intelligence, according to this theory, is considered like a resource. Money, for example, is a resource, right? Raw materials are resources. So let's take the example of money. Let's say you have a lot of money in your account, but if there is a freeze on your account, even if you have that money, you will not be able to withdraw and you will not be able to make use of that money if the government has put a freeze on your account, right? Same thing happens with respect to intelligence. Intelligence is just the capacity. It gives you the capability to solve problems. It gives you the capability to solve complex problems. But if you are highly stressed, under low stress, of course, the more the intelligence, the higher the performance. But if the stress level goes too high, then we can see that your performance starts declining, even if you are a person with high intelligence, because you are not being able to access that intelligence. You are so emotionally involved, you're so emotionally distressed that you are not being able to think clearly, and consequently you make erroneous decisions, which ultimately leads to poorer performance. So intelligence then can be seen as a resource. Now, in contrast to the high IQ leaders, an experienced leader, somebody who has had the experience of dealing with similar stressful situations, will actually be able to perform high in those stressful situations, right? Because this person has dealt with similar stressful situations in the past. So he or she will be able to make use of the experience that he has had and be able to perform well. So that's the cognitive resource theory. It gives you some insights about how intelligence then can cease to be an asset in certain conditions, unless, of course, you succeed in managing yourselves well in high stressful conditions. I have some write-up description here about the cognitive resource theory, exactly what I just mentioned. So I won't spend time here. You can read it up yourself, and I will proceed to the next slide. So now that we have finished our discussion on intelligence, let's go to the next one, self-confidence. Self-confidence is a big predictor of whether or not you will be perceived as a leader. In fact, when I was talking about the great man theories of leadership and how they were not finding any traits common across all the great leaders due to which they were getting disillusioned, there was one trait though that occurred more frequently than any other traits, and that was self-confidence. So self-confidence turns out to be a strong predictor of whether or not you will be perceived as a leader. Most leaders that you can think of often tend to be very confident individuals. Now, there will be exceptions to these rules, which we will discuss in context of other theories, but actually maybe even in context of the trait theory later on. But self-confidence generally is a great predictor, because you see, no one likes to follow somebody who doesn't appear to be confident. Imagine I am lost in a city. I'm in a new town. I am lost there, and I am seeking directions from some strangers. I ask for the first person that I meet, hey, can you help me find the direction to whatever XYZ office? And the person thinks and tells me in a very unsure way, maybe you should go straight on this road and turn right at the second left, or no, maybe third left, and maybe you should find it there. Okay. Now contrast such a response with somebody else. When I ask the same question, the person says very confidently, oh, XYZ office. Oh, yeah, I know. Oh, just go straight and then take the fourth turn and make a right turn there, and if you walk 10 yards, you will see the XYZ office there. Now, which person am I going to follow? Obviously the second person, right? Because this person seems to be saying things very confidently. Now it is possible that the second person is giving me completely wrong directions and the first person was giving me the correct directions. But because the second person spoke so confidently, I'm much more likely to follow this person's directions, right? So I'm going to be more likely to be influenced by this second person. So that's, I think, a good illustration of how much self-confidence matters when it comes to leadership, when it comes to you being able to influence people. The next factor is determination. You see, this turns out to be a very important factor as well, because doesn't matter how talented you are, doesn't matter how intelligent you are or self-confident you are, you will receive failures, not just in your personal sphere, but professionally, and especially when you are trying to lead a larger group of people, you will receive setbacks. You will come across major hurdles. So people who are determined only continue to persist despite those setbacks, despite those problems, despite those hurdles. They don't give up very easily. And most common folks give up during those difficult circumstances. And that is the reason determination becomes a great predictor of whether or not you will be a great leader. It's what would separate the small-time leaders from great leaders, right? You can see how this makes sense. So, for example, here there is the example of Nelson Mandela, who was in jail for I believe 27 years, if I remember correctly. So imagine, you being jailed for 27 days, and we will become gloomy, we will give up on life, or just couple of days. This person was in jail for 27 years. He could have easily lost hope of ever being able to fight for his nation against apartheid. But he never gave up. He continued to fight from the jail, right? So that shows determination. We give up very easily, but people who end up being great leaders are extremely determined individuals. The next factor is integrity, and you can realize why that matters a lot. Because people who have high integrity, we can trust these leaders. You can imagine a person who lacks integrity, then we will not trust this person. Or at least once we realize that this person lacks integrity, we will not trust this person anymore. Consequently, we will not be willing to follow this person because this person could harm us, could harm others. But if we believe that a person has high integrity, we will be willing to follow this person, maybe even till our death. Mahatma Gandhi, for instance, had a strong reputation of being a person of high integrity, and that helped him a lot when he was leading India towards its independence. If you have seen the movie Gandhi, there is a great scene there in which, during the Satyagraha, where Gandhi and Gandhi's followers, Gandhi was actually not present at that point of time because he had been jailed, but his followers, following Gandhi's precepts, were protesting against the Britishers, but very peacefully. They had determined not to take up arms. And the British soldiers and the Indian soldiers who were working under the Britishers, there is this great scene where these people who are protesting, they walk up to these policemen and without protesting, and these policemen, they beat them up, they fracture their skulls, these people start bleeding, and then there will be these women folks that carry them away, and the second line of protesters will reach the cops, and the cops will beat them down, break their bones, fracture their skulls. They will be taken away, and this goes on and on and on for several hours. I mean, the movie tells that it goes on for goes on deep into the night. Of course, the scene lasts for a minute or two. Now, imagine the kind of influence that Gandhi had on these people. He could have this kind of influence because people believed in Gandhi completely, right? And because of his integrity, because of his reputation of being a person of high integrity, people were ready to take such extreme measures where they are ready to be killed. Now, it's one thing to run towards an enemy while you are being fired and while you are having a gun in your hand, while you are firing. You do a lot of those stuff in the heat of the moment. But walking peacefully, knowing that you will have your bones broken, you will have your skulls fractured, that requires a lot of courage. And that was, of course, possible because of these people being led by a person like Gandhi, who had the reputation of being a person of high integrity. Anyway, the last one is sociability. And so how inclined you are towards interacting with people. Are you a social person? Are you a loner? You see, how did we define leadership? We defined leadership as the process of influencing others to attain some common goal. How can you influence others if you are not willing to interact with them? Now, if you are a loner, then of course you will be at a major disadvantage when it comes to leading. So people who are highly sociable, they then have an edge over people who are less sociable when it comes to leadership, because influence can happen only through interactions, and only when you interact with people will you be able to influence them. So this is where we will stop. These are the 5 major traits that have been identified to be associated with leadership emergence. In the next video, I will talk about the big 5 personality traits and how those traits relate with leadership.